Today, we delve into the abyss of human suffering, exploring the 10 most horrific punishments ever conceived, ranked from worst to the most gruesome. The rack, breaking body and spirit. Number 10, meet the rack, an innocent-looking ladder with a sinister twist. Instead of rungs, it has rotating bars that look like oversized rolling pins. When a prisoner was placed on the rack, he would have his feet and wrists tied to a ratchet pulley system, where 2 legal officials would slowly tighten the ropes and lock them in place, placing an increasing amount of strain on the prisoner's joints, like shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows, with every single turn until they were on the brink of snapping. The unbearable pain was meant to force a confession, but in many cases, the desperate would say anything to make it stop, whether it was true or not. Take Anne Askew, a brave 25-year-old who found herself on the rack in 1447. Her crime was daring to read and preach the Bible. Despite her screams and dislocated joints, her torment didn't end with the rack. Paralyzed, she was carried to the stake and burned alive, betrayed by her own husband, no less. Keelhauling, a sailor's watery grave. Number 9. Keelhauling was a sailor's worst nightmare, reserved for those guilty of theft or violence on board. The condemned would have his arms bound with a thick rope, which was then looped under the entire ship, like some twisted version of a maritime lasso. With a shove, the sailor was thrown overboard, and the crew would haul him around the ship's hull. But here's the kicker: he wasn't just dragged through open water, he was pulled over the keel, the ship's barnacle-encrusted spine, which is how this punishment gets its name. But a lot of the time, the sailor wouldn't even have to worry about it since they were dead before they ever reached it. Kind of just depends on how hard the guys on the rope felt like working that day. Not only were the sailors drowning and getting their backs and necks broken on the keel, they were also getting sliced apart like a cheese grater by all the sharp barnacles on the outside of the ship, peeling away their skin like paper, bones cracking against the keel. And all the while, the relentless sea threatened to fill his lungs with each merciless pull. Survival was a long shot, but even if he miraculously made it around, the ordeal wasn't over. He might face another round of keel hauling. One of the most well-known historical examples of keel hauling involves Jan Blank. On October 11, 1652, under the command of Jan van Riebeek, Jan Blank, a sailor, was subjected to this horrific punishment. His crime was desertion for a mere 9 days. Crushed by elephant, a royal spectacle of death. Number 8, in 19th century India, justice came in many forms, some more terrifying than others. Imagine being sentenced to death, not by the sword or the gallows, but under the massive crushing weight of an elephant. These majestic creatures were once instruments of execution, used to punish crimes as severe as theft and desertion or as trivial as failing to pay your taxes. The most infamous instance of this gruesome spectacle occurred when the 4th Mughal emperor, Aurangzeb, decided to entertain himself by ordering an entire crowd of criminals to be crushed in a single day. A macabre form of entertainment, to say the least. There's always a trainer on top of the elephant controlling its every move. The first method of execution was where the criminals would have their arms tied behind their back and their heads placed on a pedestal where it was then crushed like a grape by the elephant's foot. The second method is much more cruel. The criminal would be placed flat on the floor with their arms tied behind their backs. Then the elephants would be guided to walk over the person's body, and hopefully the criminal would die on the first go. But sometimes they just ended up crushing a leg or an arm. So the elephant then has to make a U-turn and try again and again and again. The final and worst way is when a highly trained elephant was guided to slowly crush the person limb by limb. They would first crush the arms, then the legs, and then poke holes in them with the tusk until eventually dealing the final blow to their head or torso. Impalement, a slow and agonizing death. Number 7. This punishment was used around the world, but most recently practiced in 17th century Egypt. Impalement was reserved for highway robbers, grave thieves, and anyone daring enough to threaten rebellion. The condemned would be lying face down, hands tied behind their back. a thick razor-sharp stake as wide as a man's arm, with its tip tapered and greased for one grim purpose. An incision is made to widen the natural exit, and a paste was applied to stop the blood. The stake was then driven into the body, inch by agonizing inch, with each strike of a mallet. The goal was to have the stake emerge from a shoulder, mouth, or head, depending on the executioner's gruesome preference. Once impaled, the victim was hoisted upright and displayed along a busy road, a terrifying spectacle meant to serve as a warning to all who passed by. In some cases, there were specially designed stakes with a seating position, which was not fully inserted in the body to avoid immediate death. The victim would then be placed on the side of the road, begging people for help. However, they would finally end up dead, succumbing to their wounds while the gravity did its work. The most infamous practitioner of impalement was none other than Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III of Wallachia. His name became synonymous with terror in the 15th century, as he ordered the impalement of thousands of enemies, creating ghastly forests of bodies to deter any challengers. This wasn't just punishment, it was psychological warfare at its most brutal. The rat bowl and tube, a carnivorous nightmare. Number 6. In 1568, during the brutal 80 Years' War, a Dutch leader named Diederik Sonoy had a particularly twisted method of extracting confessions or punishing enemies. The setup was deceptively simple: a clay bowl, a live rat, and a prisoner's exposed flesh. The rat was placed inside the bowl, which was then flipped upside down onto the victim's stomach, chest, face, or groin. The back of the bowl was heated with a torch or hot coals, sending the rat into a panic as it searched for an escape route. The only way out was the soft flesh beneath. Driven by sheer terror, the rat would claw, bite, and burrow its way into the victim's body. Eventually, the rat might find its way out, but for the poor soul beneath, survival was far less certain. But if you think that's horrifying, the second technique used by the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet in the late 1970s took this nightmare to a whole new level. Dubbed the rectoscope, this torture involved inserting a tube into the victim's rectum. And yes, you guessed it, a rat was sent in next. As the creature burrowed deeper, the prisoners were expected to answer questions. Many didn't survive the ordeal, and the number of those who disappeared during Pinochet's reign remains a grim mystery. Scaphism, a living hell. Number 5. Scaphism, also known as the boats, was mostly employed by the ancient Persian Empire for those convicted of murder. The victim was strapped to a wooden boat which had 4 holes, with his arms and legs sticking out into the water. They would then force-feed him buckets of honey and milk, enough to make his belly swell up like a balloon and also coat his entire body with the sticky syrup. Imagine a human piñata, dripping sweet syrup from head to toe, pushed out to the middle of the lake. It is a magnet for every creepy crawly in the kingdom. Flies, wasps, you name it. They're having a buffet on this poor soul. And as if that wasn't enough, the honey and milk combo turns them into a human geyser of diarrhea, attracting even more of those delightful critters. It's a daily torture routine. Every morning, another round of honey and milk, a fresh coat of sticky bait. It was also well documented that the rodents would continuously attempt to burrow inside of the person through their back door. They were probably trying to get a head start on the next meal. Days turn into a blur of agony as bugs burrow into his flesh. The sun beats down, and his body becomes a breeding ground for maggots. The Roman writer Johannes Zonaras described this torment as one of the most brutal ever devised, recounting a case where a man endured this hellish ordeal for 17 days before succumbing. Brazen Bull, burnt alive. Number 4. Brazen Bull was a horrifying instrument of torture and execution devised by the ancient Greeks and later adopted by the Romans to punish their enemies in the most gruesome way imaginable. Shaped like a life-sized bull, this hollow statue made of brass or bronze became a fiery tomb for its victims. Once locked inside the bull's belly, they were roasted alive over a blazing fire, their flesh searing from the intense heat. The design was insidious. Pipes inside the bull turned the victims' agonized screams into twisted animalistic bellows, while smoke from their burning bodies wafted out through the nostrils, eerily mimicking puffs of incense. During the Great Persecution from 303 to 313 AD, when Christians were systematically hunted and executed, early Christian martyrs like Saint Antipas, Saint Pelagia the Virgin, and Saint Eustace, along with his family, were said to have met their fiery end inside this monstrous contraption, the Spanish donkey. Number 3. The Spanish donkey, also known as the donkey's perch or wooden horse, was a twisted and brutal torture device that emerged in medieval and early modern Europe. Its sinister design earned its name from the structure it mimicked, a wooden apparatus with a sharp triangular saddle resembling a donkey's back. Victims were forced to straddle the pointed edge, legs dangling on either side, their full weight bearing down on the razor-thin wedge. To make matters worse, their hands were often shackled or weighed down, ensuring their bodies pressed harder against the brutal edge. The sharp saddle dug mercilessly into the victim's perineum, genitalia, or rectal area, causing unbearable agony. With every moment spent on the device, the pressure mounted, sometimes resulting in gruesome injuries as flesh tore under the strain. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Spanish donkey was a tool of terror across Europe and a favorite instrument of public punishment and humiliation during the Spanish Inquisition. The Pear of Anguish. Number 2. The Pear of Anguish, also known as the Spanish pear or choke pear, was a nightmarish torture device from the medieval and early modern periods. This grotesque instrument resembled a pear, made from metal or wood, with sections that could be expanded by turning a key. The cruelty of the Pear of Anguish lay in its versatility. It could be inserted into various orifices depending on the intended form of torture. Oral, anal, and vaginal versions of the device existed, each designed to unleash a specific kind of torment. Once inserted, the key would be twisted, causing the pear to slowly expand, stretching and tearing the surrounding tissue. The more the key was turned, the greater the agony, and the more severe the damage inflicted. Historically, the Pear of Anguish was often used to punish those accused of blasphemy or sexual offenses. Female victims were subjected to the vaginal pear, their suffering made a public spectacle to shame and degrade them. Male victims endured the anal pear with the same intent, to cause excruciating pain while humiliating them in the process. The Oubliette, forgotten alive. Number 1, and finally, to top the horror list, we have the grim fate of the Oubliette, a French term meaning to forget. Picture a tiny pitch-black stone coffin, so cramped you can't sit, stand, or lay down. The Tower of London, Warwick Castle, and many European castles depict these horrors. A stone box underground called Little Ease was found in the London Tower. Once inside, days turned into a blur of hunger and thirst. If you're lucky, dehydration or starvation ends the nightmare quickly, but luck is a cruel joke in this game. Often, your cellmate is a decaying corpse, a silent reminder of what awaits you. And then there are the rats, those cold-blooded squatters that developed a taste for human flesh. But the real horror stories come from the survivors, people trapped in these pits for years, clinging to crumbs in the faintest hope. Some oubliettes were even built at ground level, a sick joke of torment. Imagine hearing laughter and life just inches away, while you rot in your own personal hell. These places aren't just dungeons, they're tombs for the living, a testament to man's inhumanity. In 1900, a worker at Ireland's Leap Castle stumbled upon an oubliette brimming with skeletons, so many that it took multiple carloads to clear them. And there you have it, the 10 most gruesome human punishments explained.